So for today's workshop, what we were really go through is just testing and adding React testing library. I feel that for front end anything really, testing is really important. And when you get to your interviews and whatnot, right? Not talking about testing might actually deduct points from your overall experience. So knowing about testing is really important. Not only that, testing gives you a lot of confidence on your code. It allows you to refactor with ease, right? And the reason I really like React testing library is because it really mimics more, or it simulates the way the user really uses the app. And ever since I started my career, I've always taken more of a behavior driven approach to testing. So I like to really test the way the user uses the components, right? And I think that's where React testing library really shines here. So we're just gonna really go over this app. It's a really simple app that we have here. It's just a logging form, very basic. If the email is wrong, pending that our mega good validation here, just imagine that this is like NASA top validation right here, right? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna validate our input, and if it's not a valid email, it's just going to throw an error. It's going to display a message, right? So we're going to be able to test a few different things here. We're going to be able to test just, let's say, a function. We're going to be able to test if the data that was input was correct. We're going to be able to test that event clicking, event inputting, text changes, and all that. So, because you are using Create React app here, we don't really need to install it. Anything else, it already comes with React testing library out of the box. It already comes with Jest DOM, basically set up for us. If you want to override this, you can always override through adding your own Jest configuration and your own setup test files here. So it even gives you an app.test, right? So let's start digging in, and let's start writing some tests. So the first thing that we want to do, right? If you notice, we have a function here which is being exported, and we're also using styled components. By the way, I'm a mega fan. If you've been to my workshops, you know this already. So let's import our validate input function. So we're gonna call validate input, and let's delete this, and let's. So when you write this scribe, which by the way you don't need to import or anything because it is part of Jest, we create a suite of tests, and with this suite of tests we're going to be able to add different tests, which within those tests will have different checks. And this will allow us to basically be able to debug our test easier, because the more granular they become, right? And I'm not saying go full on granular, but I'm saying there's a balance. And the more granular, when you find that granularity sweet spot, it becomes really easy to debug, because you're able to identify which part of the test broke way faster, right? So what we're gonna do here is just gonna, let's say we're gonna describe the login form. So we're describing the entire suite, the behavior of this form, right? And we're just gonna open a callback. So a describe statement, just very similar to a test statement. The anatomy is very simple, actually. We have a string, which is the first argument, and the second argument is a callback. And in this case, the contents of this callback are gonna be just more test statements. They could also be described. You could actually nest suites within suites. So we're gonna go test, and we're just gonna say should, or validate function should, I don't know, validate, or should pass on correct email, let's say, or correct input, let's just say. Just make it a little bit more generic. Then again, similar to a describe statement, the second argument is a callback. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna say, all right, so let's just write some text. Text, right? And what we're gonna say is text at test.com. And then what we're gonna say is, so the actual first statements that we use to create assertions in Jest, and this is part of Jest, right, is the expect statement. So we can actually go and write expect, and then we're gonna say validate input So if we pass text, this should be true, to be true, right? That should be our first test. And what we're saying, all right, so let's look at our other function, right? And you know what, let's just bring it over here. You don't need to follow this part. I'm just gonna bring it over here. So what it does, right? The function takes a string as an argument, and the argument, we add the includes, which is a string operator. And what includes does is that as soon as it finds that piece that we're specifying to it, it will either return true, or if it doesn't find it, it will return false, right? So when we're saying expect validate input and we give it a string with an at sign, it should be true, right? So because we are using create react app and we don't need to install anything else, we could just do npm test. And the reason why this happens is because we're using create react app, this already comes out of the box set up for us, right? So we're gonna do npm run test. Let me expand this. See, just already comes fully blown out of the box, set up, giving us really nice detailed information. So it passes. Awesome. Now in testing, we also always want to test the edge cases, right? We also want to make sure that this fails if we don't give it the right information, right? So we don't include an at sign or something that causes this to be a false value, right? So we're gonna add another test statement, and we're just gonna say validate function should fail on incorrect input, right? And now we're just gonna say const text equals text. And again, we're just gonna write an assertion, and what we're gonna say is validate input text. And you know what, just to add some fun to it here, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna say not dot to be true, right? If it's not true, it's gonna be false. So this should be return false at this moment. And as soon as, right, we have this and it passes, now see, we have two tests. Validate function pass correct input, and validate function should fail on incorrect input. And we've kind of already there just created a little bit of a function test or of a unit test, right? But, you know, let's talk a little bit about the actual component and how we can go about actually doing that component. And I just hit save, and I don't know if you noticed, but my build kicked off again. And that is because by default, if we run in create react app just and test, it'll just have the watch flag for us. So it'll just keep watching. And you know, this really takes test-driven development to the word, because you could actually have another console, and I do this all the time, where you have, let's say, a new terminal pane, and in the terminal pane you have npm run test and watch. And as you're developing, if you have this parallel to your VS Code, you could see if when you make a change, if any test fail, you immediately know that your test broke something, right? So now we're gonna go ahead and add our first component test. And this is more of a UI thing, of a DOM thing, but first of all, my first test, and this is actually already a habit for me, I like to make sure that the component is actually in the document, right? So we're gonna do this by obtaining this value. So we're gonna get by text, we're gonna expose the DOM, we're gonna get the node by the text, and we're gonna assert that the DOM is actually in the document, right? So we're gonna say render, renders or login form should be in the document. Again, first argument is a string, and the second one is just gonna be a callback. And in this callback, we're just gonna say const, then we are going to write just, you know what, I was gonna destructure, but we'll just say component, and we're gonna say render, and then we're gonna say app, right? So here is now where we're starting to use React Testing Library. And what React Testing Library, let me see if this is an error. Okay, so what React Testing Library is gonna do for us is it's gonna provide us the render function, and this render function, we're gonna pass it our component, and this is gonna take care of exposing the DOM for us and giving us the power and the accessibility to be able to reach into the nodes, grab the nodes, and perform assertions on them. So what we're gonna do here is we're actually gonna say, all right, we're gonna just show you what component is. Console.log component, right? So let me expand this a little bit. And this is a huge, huge object. Therefore, we're gonna have a lot of information and a lot of opportunities to test different things. But right off the bat, right, it gives us all the selectors or queries that we can use. So as you can see, we could do query all by label text. We can find all by label text, but we can also do more specific things like get by text or get by role or just, find by data test ID, things like that. So if you can see also, we're gonna have a lot of information here right now that's just gonna be null, but a lot of information about the component itself, right? So let me minimize this. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, all right, const, and we're gonna say input node. I like to call them input or node, or element. You can do either or, it's fine. And we're gonna say input element is component dot get by, and we have some nice autocomplete here, get by text. And because we are being a little bit, we're not adding any like case sensitivity or anything, we're just gonna say email exactly as it is, right? And now we're gonna write our first assertion, and we're gonna say expect input node to be in the document. And essentially what this is doing is we're grabbing the input node. So React testing library is gonna look for this input node by get by text. Then we're gonna expect that the input node is in the document, and this is actually an added assertion from just DOM. So if we go down here and we hit save, this should be true, because what's gonna happen is that, we're looking that essentially email was rendered in the HTML content, right? Cool, sweet. So now, login should be in the document. Let's write another test statement, right? And, we now know that, we have an input, we have labels. Let's make sure that our label and our inputs are correctly related to each other, right? And we can actually do that a couple different ways. But I think that the nice one here is that because we've labeled HTML4, right, and there is a relationship here between the input label in the for attribute and the name attribute or the ID attribute, right, they should be related together. So if we look for the label email, we should be able to find the input which corresponds to the name email. So what we're gonna do is we're just going to, we're just going to copy this again, and we're just gonna say test, and then we're gonna say email field should have label. Now, what we're gonna say here is we're just gonna paste what we had up top, right? And obviously, as you're writing this test, I'm just repeating right now, but as you're writing your test, you don't need to like copy paste. You can use actually different lifecycle hooks that just brings out like before test or before all or before each, things like that. So now that we're on the input node, we're gonna say, all right, we're gonna change it here. We're not gonna call it get by text. We're actually gonna say get by label text, right? So if we go to our app, our label text is email, and we're gonna say, let's just call this one email input node, right? This actually is not input node, this is more label node, really, now come to think about it. So we are gonna reach to the email field by means of the label. Because we've labeled our, no pun intended, because we've labeled our labels and our inputs correctly, we should be able to reach into our input because of this. So we're just gonna say, all right, we're gonna use another part of React testing library. So we're just gonna say, all right, expect, and we could say, all right, expect email input node dot attributes, was it? Get attribute. And we're gonna say that the attribute for, right? So if we're saying, all right, we're saying get label by text, actually it should be the attribute name, I think. All right, so yes, because we're looking at that input node, we're just gonna say to be email. Let's just save that and let's see if this worked, right? If we correctly labeled our stuff, and if not, we just go back and we fix it up, right? But it worked. So what this essentially is telling us is that, hey, our accessibility is really on point at this point, because we've actually related our inputs and our label correctly, right? And we can prove it because, hey, we went to the component app, we grabbed the label, we didn't even grab the input. We grabbed the label, which the email text, and then we grabbed the attribute of what is related to that label. We looked for the name, and it should be name. And if we go to our input, we'll see that our name is actually email. So awesome. Now we're gonna start exploring a little bit of how React Testing Library manages events. And we're gonna do that by writing another test. And we're gonna say email input should accept text. And now we are gonna open a statement. And if you notice down here, right, we have for each of these, so first of all, we have the describe statement, which is this, right? And I'm just gonna write describe statement. This way we can actually see what's going on here in the reporting terminal, right? And now we're gonna say, all right, login describe statement, and each of these cases is down here, right? So if any of this test fails at any of this point, we're gonna be able to identify where it happened quicker, rather than if this was a big test, just one test case, we'd actually have to go do a lot of debugging, right? So that's where I'm meaning about finding the sweet point of granularity in your tests. Now, we're gonna, just actually this time we're gonna look for the input node and equals render app. And we're essentially just doing the same thing we did up here, but now we're gonna say fire event, then we're gonna say change, and then we're gonna tell it email input node. Then we're gonna pass in a second argument, and in this argument, what we're gonna say is target value, and the value is gonna be testing, right? And also, before we do this, we're just gonna say expect email input node dot value to match or to match. We're just gonna say to match, just to show you something different. And we're gonna copy this line right here. I'll bring it down here. And now we're gonna say down here that it should match testing. So before I run this test, I just wanna walk you through what we're doing, all right? So we're just destructuring get labeled by text, that way we don't have to write component dot, right? And what we're essentially doing is we're just unpackaging what render from React Testing Library does for us. Now, once we grab that node, we're gonna say, hey, that node should be empty right now. There should be no text there. And essentially, that's what we're doing. Then we're using fire event, which we imported from Testing Library React. And we are using a method called change, like on change, right? When you're writing your React apps. And then we're saying that email, so it's gonna take the email input node, and then it's gonna grab the target value and it's gonna, change it to testing. Then we're gonna expect that testing was actually input into the node. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna hit save here, right? And voila, there we go, right? So, it's interesting because at this point, we should also, be able to notice that if our little mischievous validator, came to be. So if you remember, we have this validator here. So what this is saying, hey, if there is an email and the email is not valid, meaning it doesn't have an @ sign, we want you to display this error message, which if not, just null, right? And what we could say here is const error message node equals, and we could say, let's see, we could say email not valid here, right? And we could say get by text. We could say email not valid. So if we do expect error message node to be in the document. Cool. Hopefully that should pass. So what we're saying now is that because the email was, all right, so we have a failure here. All right, it says get by text. Query selector all. Oh, that's because we actually never imported. Cool. So the reason we actually have this error here, and I forgot here, is because we actually, I think, never really import this, right? So get by text. And hopefully that should pass now. We're actually never importing get by text, thus it would fail, right? So now we are all passing. So essentially what's going on is that because we've actually, so we're again testing the validator, but we're now testing that the validator integrates well with the component. So now if we do fire event, right, and we just write fire event again, and then we do change, then we say email input node, comma, second argument, open an object, target, open another object, value, and the key would be testing. And now we would say at. Now we could grab this same line, 36, copy it, paste it right after our new message, and we could say not to be in the document, right? And essentially what's gonna happen now is that we've gone through a little bit of a workflow, right? If you notice, this is what the user does. So the user goes and looks at a label, it looks email, cool, it finds the label is related to the input, so it knows, all right, in this input, I should input my email, right? Now, we're gonna assert that this should be empty. The user has not at this point added any text to it. Then the user, is gonna add text to it, and that text is gonna be testing. Now, we're gonna assert that the value of the input node was testing. Now, because we didn't add an @ sign, meaning it'll fail our validation, our handy mega error handling message should reveal itself. And it is now in the document because email is not valid, now exists in the document. Now it is present in the DOM. Then we're gonna say the user is gonna go in again and is gonna type his email again with an @ sign, and the error message should not be in the document anymore, meaning it went away, right? So that's the beauty of React testing library, I feel, in the sense, if you could see, this is really how I would see a user more using or interacting with our application, right? Rather than saying, hey, you button with the class 1, 2, 3, click yourself. That's never happened. So now what I want to go over is teaching you how to add another fire event, and this time we will be submitting the form. And we actually want to test, that the button was clicked, the button works. We're gonna add a spy, which is a jest function that it'll essentially integrate ourselves into our code. We will provide it to our code, and it'll essentially, be listening for any events that happen, such as a click, and then we can actually assert if it happened or not, right? So we're just gonna say test, another argument, and we're gonna say, you know, should be able to submit form. Now we're gonna write the callback, our second argument, and this time around, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, okay, let's find another one just to, if you notice, so I created this button, right? And I said it's role button, and we have submit, and that means that when it submits, it should handle submit, which is something, a function or a callback that we're providing as a prop. So we're gonna say, and this is, at this point, it's just more convention for me. I just do mock fn. Then we're just gonna say jest.fn, and this is a spy. And now what we're gonna do is constant, I was almost spelling it out, we're gonna destructure get by role, and then we're gonna say render, we're gonna say app, we're gonna do handle submit, which is the prop. At handle submit, we're gonna pass mock function, and here we're gonna say, you know, we're just gonna close that. Then we're gonna go ahead and grab our components, so button node, and we're gonna say render, and for render we're gonna do get by role, and in get by role we're gonna get by button. Nice. Now we should go ahead and say fire event dot submit, and we're gonna click button node, and let's just see what happens. So by the way, we are clicking a button, but the action that we're actually performing is submitting a form. So what we're gonna do this time around is we're gonna use submit, not click, because if we click the button, nothing's gonna happen with the form. The event's not gonna register, right? So we're gonna do fire event dot submit, and then we're just gonna say expect mock function. And again, this is a just DOM assertion. We're gonna say to have been called times, be careful with the casing here, times 1. So essentially what we're saying is that, hey, this function was clicked, the event was submitted, and now we are expecting this spy that we installed in the component, so just that function, to have been called at least once, right? If we went ahead and we submitted this 2 times, this would now fail because the event happened twice, and we are saying, hey, it only clicked once, but you know, maybe in the back, maybe there's a bug, and 2 events got fired off, right? So now we could just say twice. It was called twice if we actually intended to be called twice, right? And there's other assertions. I'm pretty sure, I think this is one where we could do to have been called. It's just, hey, it was called, right? We're not specifying how many times, how many, nothing, but there's plenty of those. So, you know, just to recap, we have 6 passing tests. All of them are inside a describe statement, which is up here. And then we have our email inputs, we're testing everything.